Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war frontline update for the 28th of March 2023. Let's go straight to the front line. No kind of preamble today. The only thing worthy of mention in the ISW daily report before they get to the front line is the mention that in the Avdivka area, Wagner fighters could be being used. So it could be that the attention has shifted from Bakhmut to Avdiivka as they sniffed some kind of element of weakness in the Ukrainian defense there. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Let's go to the northeast, Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna front line. On my map, that looks rather like this. So we have Kupiansk in the north here, and then to the northeast, Dvorichna, Sinkivka, Hranikivka, a few places around there that get mentioned. And it's the usual kind of repulsed attacks around there. Ukrainian General Staff reported continued unsuccessful offensives near Sinkivka. And then also Kreminna, Bilorivka, Vimka, Vesele. So this is going now down further south of Bilorivka to some degree. Geolocated footage posted on March 27th indicates that Russian troops have advanced into Ryarodka, 12 kilometers west of Svatova. Now, this is, again, where I check the claims, the geolocation. Well, the idea that they've marched into... So let's go and have a look at where Ryarodka is. Well, actually, so we come down. So basically, not a lot to report. A little bit going on maybe in Sinkivka direction. But other than that, nothing to report until we get all the way down past Svatova, which is here. And then to the southwest of Svatova, there's this kind of area here. This is Ryarodka. Now, I've had Ryarodka under Russian control for months, right? I think, may have had a little talk about Ukrainians gaining something there. I don't know, some time ago, distant memory though. But basically, yeah, firmly under Russian control. So when they have a geolocation taking place here and up and down this road of shelling, so the Russians being shelled there, which is to say the Russians are there because they are being shelled by the Ukrainians, caught on camera, all that kind of stuff. It says, indicates that Russian troops have advanced into Ryarodka. It's just a little bit weird because they've been there, as far as I'm concerned, for months. But it may be that the ISW treated this as grey zone, where there were maybe claimed advances, but nothing specified, and haven't really looked at it since then. And now they're saying, yep, they definitely are there because we've got geolocated footage. But I wouldn't say they've advanced there, well, at least as far as I'm concerned, that they've been there all along. So I don't think that there is anything significant to talk about on this whole front line. Until you get down to Kreminna, there are claims that they're trying to push west of Ploshchanka still, and then obviously in the Yempelivka area, but nothing too much mentioned about that. But what I find interesting is here, a Russian military correspondent, says the ISW, reportedly embedded with Russian troops near Kreminna, claimed on March 26th that Russian paratroopers and unspecified naval infantry elements, so Marines, are advancing 500 meters per day near Kreminna and capturing Ukrainian fortified positions. So for every day they're advancing 500 meters from here, let's sort of mark that out. So they're going from there every day. They're going. So that's about, give or take, 500 meters, right? So if that's every day, so you expect, okay, that's 2 days, that's 3 days. Sorry, that's probably 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days. I mean, my line here, this red line, hasn't moved for about, I don't know, 3 weeks. But actually, they should be way down here. In fact, really, if that was true going on, it depends how long that's over. But the Russian line should have moved considerably. It hasn't moved, not as far as I know. So I would take that claim with a huge dollop of saline product. Ukrainian Eastern Group of Forces spokesperson Cherevati reported on March 26th that Russian forces are conducting the highest number of artillery strikes along the entire Kupiansk-Liman line, and that there were 10 combat clashes in this line over the past day. Right, I just want to let you know that 10 combat clashes along here. So think of how long this is. Now, the combat clash is just going to be a bunch of troops going to attack somewhere, right? Or a tank attacking somewhere, right? For there to be 10 attacks along here in one day is nothing. That basically signifies that this line is not doing anything. 10 attacks on and that's effectively a quarter of the active front line, maybe even more. Yeah, probably a quarter to a third of the active front line. Given that I'm not including Kherson. So the fact there's 10 attacks is nothing. And so when we've been talking about, I've been mentioning that there's been 50 or 60 attacks across the whole front line over a day. Most of these are going to be taking place in Bakhmut and Avdivka. It means that there is not a lot of activity, which means it really does look like the Russians have culminated, that their offensive has ground to a halt, that they are losing huge amounts of troops and mechanized equipment at an unsustainable rate. Now, if you're going to do anything today, after watching this, go and watch Perrin's video on attrition and losses, both in terms of troops and equipment loss. It is absolutely a must view, probably his best, most important video he's done. Perrin, go and watch it. One of the very interesting things is towards the end, which is about depreciation and basically losing equipment to general wear and tear. And the amount that this stuff gets used on the front line in active duty means that they're far more likely to break down, come a cropper, wear out, whatever. So and that includes airplanes. We talk about losses in terms of Oryx, about what the visual evidence of this bit of equipment getting blown up, or that bit being abandoned and ID dropped in its hatch. What we're not knowing, what we don't have a good grasp on, is how many hundreds and hundreds of vehicles and howitzers and whatnot are having to be taken back to be fixed up and can't be fixed up because they can't get the parts. There must be a huge attrition rate, because we know from previous wars, like in the Gulf with the American army, and they had really good logistics trail, that actually when you start using equipment on the front line, man, it turns out that you've been keeping that in a warehouse for years and using it sporadically. Turns out when you throw it on the front line and start using it properly, it starts wearing out and comes into problems. So and this would be the case for both sides, but for Russia, there just must be that. Yes, they're firing way more rounds of ammunition every day, but that means they're wearing out their artillery more every day, which means they're going to have a greater strain on their logistics, on their maintenance schedules and trails. So really, really important. And I think you start throwing that into the equation, as well as a culmination in terms of troop losses and exhausting your momentum with your infantry. I'd imagine that Russia are probably finding things pretty difficult at the moment. Okay, as you come further down south, sorry, that was a bit of a sidebar. Bilorivka down to here Vesele, that's been mentioned, and the northern Bakhmut area. Not a crazy amount to be mentioned of that area. We kind of get into Bakhmut as a whole. So Bakhmut's here. I've not reported for a couple of days. I don't think too much is happening up here towards Zalizhnensky and going along this road. There was some footage I showed you a couple of days ago of a Ukrainian tank hammering some Russian infantry there. Don't think there's been anything since then. And we come down, reporting from Ukraine's talked quite a bit about Bakhmut over the last few days, the last week or so. And there's been attempts of the Ukrainians to push the Russians back up here and down here. But it seems like the Russians are gaining territory in Bakhmut itself quite consistently. But the important thing is, it doesn't look like they're able to cut off any large groups of Ukrainian soldiers. So they've been able to flatten areas. I mean, this looks a bit dodgy there. But generally, when there have been these pockets, they get flattened out. And it looks like it's keeping these lines, these roads open while they concede territory in Bakhmut. So it could be that their plan is to lose Bakhmut or to hold it for as long as possible, with the view that we are probably going to lose it. But if we lose it in a sensible way, then we will grind out. The calculation is still beneficial for the Ukrainians to grind out the Russians. There's lots to be said about Bakhmut. Let's have a look at a nice clear map here. You can see that the area, according to War Mapper, here of sort of Ukrainian control is getting smaller and smaller, considerably so, especially down south. There's just a lot of pressure and a lot of gain over these suburbs in the south, and in the metallurgical plant to the north, the Russians are making gains every day, but they seem to have stopped in the Dubovo-Vasilivka or Orakovo-Vasilivka area, Bodanivka area. Kremova, they suffered a setback and were pushed back from this road coming in, and they've been pushed back from in Ivanivska, so that this road is able to be used at least to some extent. There's some claims that the Kremova road here, the 00506, is being used. Like, it is not under fire control. Well, it depends how you define fire control. Maybe not direct line of sight fire control. So there are images. There is some video of this road being used, but there is one car using it, and it is having to go something like 140 kilometers an hour. So over 100 miles an hour to try and get down there without getting hit. But Kenneth Gregg says about the area. Again, how reliable he is, I don't know. News from Bakhmut. He's the Swedish-Finnish fighter who is based in Ukraine, has been in Bakhmut. I don't think he's there at the moment, but he's got contacts there. So news from Bakhmut and Avdivka. Volunteers and journalists are now prohibited from entering Avdivka. At the same time, we have attacked eastwards and taken ground towards Kruta-Balka. I'll talk about that later, i.e. in advance of 700 meters. This is remarkable, as we have now reached the border of the 24th of February 2022 in this section. The restrictions for journalists and volunteers announces an upcoming activity. Normally, such an action would indicate withdrawal, but since we have been attacking and gaining ground, I think it's likely we have other plans. Bakhmut, in turn, faces a solution this week. Wagner has brought in normal army reinforcements, and that is true, on the flanks, and will make a final push for the solution. The Russians have realized that they cannot continue as before forever. So there is this theory that there might be one big final push by the Russians imminently in Bakhmut. Despite this, we carried out a counterattack north of the city and recovered lost positions. I don't know, it's unspecified. At the same time, the Russians managed to advance a couple of houses at the reservoir. Furthermore, they tried to advance on Koronskogo Street, but were completely eliminated. I think they have had advances around. I'll show you in a second. As a whole, we have an overview of what is happening in the Bakhmut region, and the reinforcement by the Russian army will not lead to any new strategic solutions for the time being. So he's fairly confident that things happening there. So he's saying, and interestingly, the ISW backs up this idea that Wagner are being supported by conventional Russian elements. So a prominent mill blogger noted on the 26th that Wagner is advancing Bakhmut with support from unspecified conventional Russian elements, supporting ISW's assessment that conventional formations are increasingly supporting Wagner's offensive on Bakhmut. So this also leads into the theory that Wagner have culminated, and Wagner is struggling also to get new fresh recruitments. They've been banned from, it appears, from recruiting in the Russian prison system, which really puts them in a bind for replacing lost troops. Russian media outlet RIA Novosti additionally posted footage on March 26th confirming that Wagner group fighters have advanced within the Azov complex in northern Bakhmut. Geolocated footage posted on March 27th shows Wagner group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin visiting school number 5 near central Bakhmut. Goodness me, if you're Ukrainian intelligence, you'd be wanting to get that's like your gold mine of intelligence, knowing that he was visiting somewhere, and that would be absolutely hit. So, okay, this is to say there's some gains around here. I've got, from when I last mapped, there's some slight gains in here just by this reservoir there. It's possibly what they're talking about, that I think Kenneth Gregg was talking about. Then you got movements down in the Azov. So this is according to Suryak Maps, that has quite a lot of Russian gains over the last few days. So in the Azov steel plant there, quite a few gains there. And if we go and look at previous claims as well, gains down the south. I've updated my mapping in line with this. because I think that it is probably likely that that has happened, and previously there. So, quite a lot of gains as according to Syriac maps. Um, yeah, so my map is in line with them, but it might be generous to the Russians, so bear that in mind. Uh, but certainly they are. There's geolocated footage of Russians inside different parts of the plant now that they didn't previously control, that they now appear to control. As we come down south, there doesn't seem to be any gain around here since I made some gains for the Russians. Not me personally, I wasn't fighting, certainly not for the Russians. On my map the other day. So that seems to have stabilized. The east seems to be stable along the river. However, here the Russians have made some serious gains to the west of the river, pushing probably from the south, but apparently there are claims that they might have forded it as well in this general area. So they have, from when I last spoke to you, basically this area here is now under Russian control. That wasn't. We also have further gains here. Now, this has pretty much been stable for the last 3 or 4 days. However, it's interesting that when you look at Deep State map, they don't have this. So their Deep State map looks more like that. It doesn't have some areas there, and it doesn't have, I think, some areas here. So it certainly looks different and more beneficial for the Ukrainians. Mine's in line with Syriac maps, so it may be generous to the Russians. We have some. So I've gone through Kenneth Gregg. This is an interesting map to show and again it shows that the two main roads, so the two main supply routes, which is this one coming in from the south, that's the T0504, and the O0506 coming in here. Both seem to be usable, which puts Ukraine in a good position for still being able to do an operational withdrawal if they wanted to. They are. If the decision is right to hold Bakhmut, and I don't know that, and people are still massively arguing about this, Ukraine are doing the right thing, which is keeping these MSRs open, these G-locks, these ground lines of communication to the north and south. If they go, then they can still just about use these mud roads in between, but they're fighting really hard to keep those lines open. No reports says in Bakhmut, geolocated footage located Russian troops a little further north of the Damba School number 5. In addition, footage emerged of Russian troops being attacked by Ukrainian artillery and tanks in southern Bakhmut, north of the cemetery. Troops have repelled another attack towards Kromova. So he's saying that there's repelled attacks both there and in the southern area, although he has shown some gains here. I think, well, it's difficult. No reports and Syriac maps and ISW all have slightly different accounts of what's going on. Footage from the 93rd Brigade targeting Russian troops just north of the cemetery here. So the cemetery, just to remind you, is this area here. Now there's that large building. I'm not sure exactly where it is. I probably should try and geolocate that. But this is an interesting story. I reported this morning in the news section, but this is the 93rd, who if you want to go and check them out, they've been involved quite heavily in this war since 2014. There's a 3-part documentary series on YouTube that you can watch for free that's both subtitled and dubbed into English. The 93rd lures the enemy into a building. I think there's about 10 Russian troops here in Bakhmut, and targets it after this is just north of the cemetery, so they were in the right place already. Now, apparently this was booby trapped. It wasn't hit with artillery or anything. You can see it's really big explosion to that building, causing quite a lot of damage. I did mention how the Russians need to be careful about booby trapping around Bakhmut. So as the Ukrainians retreat, it becomes difficult for the Russians, and they are have a high chance of losing quite a few troops to that southern part of Bakhmut. This is going to Andrew Perpetua, pro-Ukrainian source. Russians are attacking along Bazarna and Nazalensky streets. So this is over here near the Bakhmutovka River or Bakhmutka River, depending on who you listen to. There have been numerous videos from this area over the past few days. He goes on to say they're trying to break through the Ukrainian line around Stryoka Street, which is down in the south here, where they have made some gains. There's heavy fighting along Kupiansk Street, which is there. This one, I'll show you this all on my map in a second, especially near the high-rise apartments buildings over here. So if we go back to my map, if we come up here, this is the Kupiansk Street, where there's heavy fighting. Syriac Maps has these sort of blocks, I guess, or parts of the suburb in Russian control. Deep State Map does not, and I don't think NOAA reports either. So that may not be under Russian control. But yes. So if we continue along some of the sources, I can close these down. We come on to a very interesting article in the Kyiv Independent. Go and read it all. I work, then I cry. Exhausted medics near Bakhmut fight for every life. Just picking out a few bits from this to help support the mapping here. Once the wounded soldiers arrive at the stabilization point, the medic's most important task is to stop their bleeding before transferring them to a hospital. But it gets especially difficult when dealing with serious cases like head injuries, which require more help and skill. The toughest moment is when you need to help many soldiers with serious injuries at once. He admitted that there were times when medics had to prioritize who to help because they didn't have enough hands. About 90% of all casualties come from shrapnel injuries, according to the 42-year-old combat medic Dmitro. He estimated that another 4 to 5% are from bullet wounds, and there are a lot of concussion cases as well. In other words, it still, even though they're doing small arms fire fighting, the predominance of artillery injuries, it still remains in Bakhmut. So sometimes the wounded aren't brought to the makeshift hospital fast enough. When there is ongoing combat or intense shelling, soldiers can't evacuate their comrades. Even if the wounded make it to an evacuation point, a designated meeting spot, typically 500 meters to 1 kilometer from the front line, combat medics are not always able to get to them in time. You'll see there is a soldier with a serious injury, and you could have helped him, but if combat medics couldn't bring him to you on time, it's too late to help him. A really interesting article, loads more information in there, but I just found it interesting in terms of having to set up around here 500 meters to a kilometer. You need evacuation points where you can try and stem the bleeding. So it's the golden hour, isn't it? But the platinum 5 minutes. So if you can stop the bleeding within 5 minutes, then the guy's got a chance of living. But then if you can get them to a hospital within an hour, then it skyrockets that chance. You don't do that, these guys are in trouble. And I wonder whether Ukraine have, and even though Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant, whose article I've been going through in my new Ukraine What Extra videos, criticizing the Ukrainian army for certain things. I mean, they're doing an amazing job, but they need to improve here. And one of them is the kind of logistics, but also the medical logistics. And I bet my mortgage that the Ukrainians have a much better medical logistics than the Russians. I mean, it's what we're hearing. The Russian death numbers are much higher as a proportion of their casualties. And that would appear to be partly because they're struggling in that golden hour. And do they have the kind of medical facilities behind the front lines of the Ukrainians, being their home nation here and everyone sort of chipping in? Would the Ukrainians just be in a better position to keep those wounded alive? But yeah, it's interesting to think that there will be these places, these evacuation points, all behind the lines here to help those get the attention they need as soon as possible. But even then, it's often not enough. And CNN reporting that Ukraine has pushed Russian forces off a key road in Bakhmut. This is from yesterday, actually, this is from a few days back actually. But this was shared on one of my sources yesterday. So this is a few days ago, back in the weekend. So again, the idea that it's probably talking about this road going down through Kremova being cleared back by the Ukrainians, allowing them access into Bakhmut. Then we have border guards locating and targeting a group of 15 in southern Bakhmut that were housed in a building west of the cemetery near the forest strip. It confirms that Russians are a couple of hundred meters from south of Kurskogo Street, but so far no confirmation of them controlling it. I kind of disagree with this of no reports. I mean, I don't agree with it. They are targeting those people. This is geolocated to here. So there are a bunch of Russians getting hammered there by artillery. He's saying that there's no confirmation of them controlling Kurskogo Street at all. I don't know. It's been in the updates for kind of like a week now. They've been around here, so I would be amazed if they don't actually control that street. And by control, I mean it's the edge of the front line there. So whether they control the street or not, I guess is neither here nor there. They're fighting there. That seems to be the edge of most of their fighting in that area. Then I'm not going to show you this, but I talked to you previously about what I don't know why they don't have sort of 500 snipers. Like they haven't trained snipers the last 6 months en masse and just load them into places like Bakhmut. Because if they had loads of snipers in Bakhmut, it would be a nightmare trying to advance. It would just be if you had multiple snipers in place, just with multiple lines of sight. It would just be so difficult. You'd just be picked off. Anyway, I've seen loads of footage over the last few days of snipers doing exactly that, and some footage with multiple snipers in the same position, but obviously just being able to take out twice as many or look at slightly different views and pay attention to slightly different areas. And I've seen a bunch of footage. Here's one where a sniper just, I think, takes out 3 or 4 just like that. Bang, 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 bang. And it must be sniper's heaven here. Just that kind of urban environment, the ability to hide, especially when there's rubble and all sorts, and B, just a number of targets that would avail themselves to these snipers. And sorry, that's one I've already shown you. So yeah, that's what's going on in Bakhmut. Lots of activity. Again, don't know exactly what's going to happen, whether there's going to be some counterattack or not. I keep saying that, and it hasn't happened, or at least not in any large, meaningful way. Maybe small little counterattacks in certain key areas. I don't know whether they are going to see what the Russians do as far as maybe doing a last push for Bakhmut and then pushing back, let the Russians completely exhaust themselves and then push back, or just keep conceding territory until they lose Bakhmut. But in the meantime, the Russians have lost the ability to continue momentum, and then, I don't know, use that as a springboard for a larger counteroffensive in the area. I don't know. We shall see. Anyway, as we come down south, we go to Avdivka. So come down past Tourette's, New York, and Avdivka. So Avdiivka has been apparently hammered by artillery, by aviation. There's lots of. It's just been absolutely hammered. Avdiivka. Russian troops launched intensive missile attacks on Ukraine's Avdiivka on the 26th, where Ukrainian defenders are holding the city in the semicircle, like in Bakhmut. Reportedly, no civilian casualties, since only 6% of the pre-war population stays in the city. But apparently, Tim White talks about how some Russian sympathizers are rumored to be betraying Ukrainian positions to the occupiers. Residents have been told to evacuate. Ukrainian forces have been struggling to stay in control. Mobile networks are to be switched off there. Apparently, also, there's a rumor that the Ukrainians had their surface-to-air missile capabilities taken out in the area, which is why the aviation is able to operate with impunity there to some degree. At least that is a rumor. We certainly have seen that it's been hammered way more over the last couple of weeks, and by aviation as well. South of Avdiivka, geolocated footage shows that Russia controls less territory than previously thought. The Ukrainians have control of a former air defense site north of Spartak. An attack just south of this was repulsed. Eyes on Novokalinove. It's out of the GSUA, so the General Staff Ukrainian reports, which might indicate Russian advance there. So quite often what you get is they'll start talking about attacks towards Novokalinove, right? And then you might see 2 days later attacks towards Kherson. and they don't mention Novokalinove, which means that it's kind of implicit acceptance that that has been taken because they're now attacking the next place. And this is a really common way of understanding what has been taken in certain areas. Anyway, claim is that the Ukrainians have regained, or at least there's a movement of the mapping in this southern area. There have been some video footage of tanks getting blown up, as he sort of shows there in around the Spartak area. Russian tank seen retreating there. So it looks like the Ukrainians have pushed back in this area. There's also realignment of the mapping here around, and this is what Kenneth Gregg was talking about, attack towards Krutabalka. So this was the line up until yesterday. And it appears that the Ukrainians have pushed back around these water features there, pushed back the Russians in that area. So although Avdiivka has been the scene of quite a lot of issue for the Ukrainians, they've kind of held it together around the south, possibly pushing back around here in the Spartak area. There's a lot to be said now about what goes on up here around Novokalinove towards Stepova. There are some claims about some gains possibly in the Stepova area. So in this northern area, Novokalinove, there are reports that Russians are, at least according to the ISW, reporting that Russians are claiming they have entered Novokalinove and are attacking towards Keramik. So if that is true, then obviously that's quite an advance for the Russians in this area, that they are in this settlement and advancing towards Keramik. Whether that is true, I don't know. But yeah, so the Russians are putting a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians up there in the north. And as we come further down south, the Ukrainians are having greater success in this southern area. There is footage. So, for example, around that Spartak area, No Reports posts a video of the Russians getting hammered by IEDs, a tank getting hit there, trenches getting cleared out. So it looks like the Ukrainians might have taken control over a trench network in that area. So yeah, you can go and check out footage online for that. And then as we come further down south, so Avdiivka is just really tricky still. If we come further down south to Marinka, there are claims that the Russians have gained, and this is Suryat Maps and other sort of Russians saying that there are gains in this northern area, just the other side of kind of this water line, this water feature line, if you like. The Russians did make gains a couple of weeks ago into this area of agricultural buildings, a piggery that is there, and then nothing's really happened since then. And then over the last couple of days, they appear to have made gains in the northern part of Marinka. But as far as the central Marinka is concerned, no other gains there. No Reports doesn't show control for the Russians in that area, but there is fighting there. In Marinka, he says Russian troops attack on the north near Ivana Franka Street. Fights in the city centre continue. South of Marinka, troops try to cross the 00532 between Pobjeda and Marinka in order to encircle Marinka. It's reported that additional Russian troops were deployed to the area. Now, here, if we come down south towards Pobjeda, Suryat Maps has Pobjeda, this part of Pobjeda, under control of the Russians. They had attacked there previously, and they were repulsed from there. But he has that now back under control of the Russians. The Deep State Map and others do not. So, for example, No Reports as well. They are not in Pobjeda, but I don't know. Those are just the two claims. If we go back to ISW, we have Russian sources additionally claim that Russian forces advanced on the northern outskirts of Marinka. Geolocated footage posted on a 26th edition shows that Russian forces have advanced north of Novomakilivka, about 10 kilometers south of Avdivka. So that is some geolocated footage of Ukrainians dropping drones on Russians. 8 Russians, at least 2 hit. 11 Russians, at least 2 hit, so on and so forth. That's all been geolocated too. So we come down south of Marinka, just here. That I wouldn't necessarily say that means there have been Russian advances there. There are Russians in the grey zone. Yes, you would expect that. It is a grey zone, and they are being hit by Ukrainians there. So I'm not sure that translates to them controlling that area, But yes, they will be advancing in that area, as both sides will be, given that it's the grey zone there. And then we come down to Vuhledar. ISW reports that the Russians might have again started sort of activity around Vuhledar. They've made minor gains, perhaps 3 kilometers southeastern of Dachas. So that could be these Dachas down here rather than the ones just to the east of Vuhledar. Andrew Petra reported that just south of Blahadatne, which is just over here, there's massive attack on something there. So he said massive fire reportedly result of a Ukrainian strike south of Vuhledar. Rumors of Russian casualties in the Great Anadol Forest College there. And he produces a bunch of satellite images to locate that, but I haven't heard too much about that since then. So that's Vuhledar, and then we continue on to Zaporizhia and Kherson. Now, there's not too much to report because we know that the front lines are pretty quiet. There are reports that the VDV, Russian airborne forces, are evident along this line, sort of around Hilarpole, so just around there. Don't know what to make of that particularly, whether they are just getting ready for a potential Ukrainian counteroffensive there. Now, I talked about these guided bombs being used more in this southern area, as according to the Ukrainians. I reported that in the news video this morning. Let's just go into a little bit more detail there. Ukrainian official reported that Russian forces are shifting to the use of guided aerial bombs to strike areas in southern Ukraine. Head of the United Coordination Press Center, Humenyuk, stated that Russian forces have been testing guided aerial bombs along the contact line in Kherson Oblast for the last few days and conducted a strike against Berislav with these bombs on March the 24th. Humenyuk also noted that Russian forces have decreased their tempo of shelling in Kherson Oblast from 90 to 100 instances to 50 to 60 instances per day. This really goes in line with lack of ammunition claims and also just general culmination claims. Ukrainian Air Force spokesperson Yuri Ikhnat announced on March the 25th that Russian forces are converting FAB 500 unguided aerial bombs into guided missiles to use as a replacement for expensive cruise missiles. Ikhnat stated that these new aerial bombs have a range of 50 or more kilometers, and that would be a sensible thing for the Russians to do. This is really interesting. They've got to that stage, which indicates that they don't have the missiles that they use instead. But these bombs are pretty significant. It might also represent the ability of the Russians to have aircraft closer to the front lines than they previously have. I don't know if that's the case, or whether they just decided to use these munitions where they weren't before and they didn't have other munitions that they could use. So if they were just using purely dumb munitions, then of course you have to kind of drop that very close to the target you're attacking. You'll get some kind of forward momentum so that the bomb would drop in a kind of slightly diagonal way, but essentially you have to be flying pretty close to your target, and that's going to be difficult if the airspace is contested. But if you've now got a dumb munition that has a kit attached to it that gives you 50 kilometers of range, then you can start dropping those. You can hit, I don't know, wherever. Berislav was one of the places mentioned, and you can fly somewhere like that close, or a little bit further actually. So that gives you a lot more option to hit these targets in Kherson. So that, I think, having that munition at their fingertips to be able to use now will be very useful for the Russians. And it's no surprise that you're beginning to see these get used more and more, both up in Sumy all the way up here. So they're dropping them from behind the border to hit places in Sumy's up there. Sumy, Kharkiv, probably all of these areas are ripe for using that kind of munition, but as well, obviously Kherson and anywhere really on the front line. But they need to work out where the Ukrainians have the greatest air defense systems with the longest range to use them in places where that is less the case. And one would imagine that Kherson is a place that they have air defenses with with less range. They use a lot of Gepards around there when you got cruise missiles, I think, and the drones. So a lot of drones were sent this direction towards, into Ukraine. So they've probably got a lot of Gepards there, which means that they don't have these longer range systems. So that could be why you're seeing airplanes be using these FAB bonds, but I don't know. That's just my supposition there, speculation. Anyway, thank you. It's a slightly longer one because it's a 2-day update, really. It should be a bit shorter tomorrow. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll do a Ukraine war update extra video a little bit later.